going to be looking at the topic of patience this morning. Oh, I'm sorry.
Would you like a chair?
I think it's okay that I sit here.
Oh, perfect. Yeah.
It's absolutely okay.
If you decide you need a chair at some point, feel free.
Cool, thanks.
Okay. So we're looking at patience, which is also one of the paramitas. And I want to approach this kind of from two different aspects here this morning. I'm going to look at some specific sections from the Shantideva text, and I think I'm going to start there. But I also then want to kind of drop back and take kind of the meta view about patience in terms of seeing it as the practice of being able to stop. And the view of stopping as being critical to the act of being present. Because with our judgmental mind, for instance, we immediately start going down our accustomed path. So in order to practice patience as a paramita, we have to stop. So it's deeply tied into our Zazen practice, which is stopping. We come, we sit, we face the wall. And that's our practice, is to be present. That's why it's so important. We see thoughts as they come up. And we stop. We come back to our breath. We don't get on the ride that the thought would like to take us on. And that is also the practice of patience. So when something triggers us, stop. Be present. It doesn't mean that you can't respond. But maybe it's not a hairpin response that just boom, which is our tendency to just dive right in. And I think as we look at some of Shantideva's examples, we're going to see how that plays itself out in terms of our practice. A lot of what he says involves, because you're not just stopping, but often the guidance we receive from Shantideva tells us we need to take a larger view. That's a big part of stopping and being present. So we're still present. We don't stop to avoid the situation. We stop so we can better respond to the situation. And part of that prerequisite to a proper response is to create that broader space. And in doing so, we find that we're connecting with the Huayan teachings on interdependence, because when we create the greater space, of course, as we now understand, we're creating the space where we can see all these interdependencies that are around every situation we're responding to. And the broader the view we can get, then the more skillful our response can be. Because if we just respond right out of the gate, what we're effectively doing is ignoring these other interdependencies that are very much there and very much creating that situation. But we kind of come wired to simplify. It's fast. That's the whole story of computerization. Simplify and respond immediately. And that's what we come programmed to do. Because there was a time in our evolution, we're aware, we needed to be able to do that. Or you weren't going to survive. to reproduce and keep this thing going. So it served a purpose. But is it appropriate now? Not just now as in 2025, but now in what's really happening here. We respond to it as if it's the saber-toothed tiger from our past, what's programmed. But I think it's safe to say the vast majority of the time, nothing like that. So by creating the larger space, we begin to see how our typical response is often so inappropriate. And that's, of course, the hallmark of prajna, as Dogen put it. To study Zen is to study the self. We begin there. What am I doing? Why am I doing that? In my interdependence with all other beings. So, just some preliminary thoughts to give the context for the specific teachings that Shanti Davis is going to give us here. So I'm going to be beginning with verse 23 from the chapter 6 on patience. For though they are unlooked for, undesired, these ills afflict us all the same. And likewise, though unwanted and unsought, defilements nonetheless are quick to come. So this notion of unlooked for, undesired, we're going to see many references to this in subsequent verses here. It's to kind of really drill down into us to see that our desires and our objectives are not necessarily in sync with this situation. So we need to be able to, when I talk about pausing, obviously the heart of that is this pausing of what our desires are. If we go lead with our desire, then we've automatically really dramatically narrowed what we're able to do. And we lose sight of things like ills that afflict us, defilements that are quick to come, which of course are unlooked for, undesired. We don't want that stuff. And as a result, we don't really put our mind there. But if you're going to be present, we know this from the basic fundamental understanding of Zazen. You have to be present with everything that's coming up. So when these afflictions, these ills, these defilements are coming, we need to practice patience in order to work with those. So part of patience involves, I'll call it working with the poisons, like greed and anger, which are so often kind of embedded in our moments of impatience. Impatience tends to be about self-serving. And of course, Shani Deva here in this section, these neighboring verses is also speaking about sense of self and serving that sense. So patience is also part of what Dogen talked about, is the dropping off of self. If we kind of reflect on our own practice of patience, we can maybe see how that plays out. That we, to be patient with something, we let go of our strong desire that it be this way. This is how it should be. That's myself projecting its desire. It go just like this, because that's what I want. And so these are kind of understandings, aspects of prajna that are critical to the ability to practice patience. As I think you know, all the paramitas, they're not separate practices. They're all intertwined. We can look at them separately to great benefit, but the only way we really benefit is to, at the same time, see them as just one. There's one perfection. Consider your life as the perfection. And you can look at it as these different practices. But ultimately, those practices, in order to amount to anything, have to all be present and interlocking, because it is all just one. Like that poem I shared, like it was last week. Everything comes down to the one. That's true. So if we go on then to the next verse, never thinking, now I will be angry, people are impulsively caught up in anger. Irritation, likewise, comes though never plans to be experienced. So we never think. It's not premeditated. Well, I'm going to be angry. So we don't reflect on that. That sounds like a good piece of work for the Greek philosophers. Because they were focused on bringing the rational mind in. The rational mind would lead you down the right path. So to understand, and part of that understanding is to help us deepen our understanding of interdependence. So what creates the aim? If it's not our willing it, we don't say, well, now I'm going to be angry. That's the appropriate response. I have these responses to choose from. This is an anger response that's called for. It comes up. And then, of course, the natural question is, well, why? Why did it happen that way? And that means we need to stop and start looking at that broader web of interdependencies, because that's what's driving it. If it was a simple matter of what you wish, what you willed, the choice you selected, well, this would be a piece of cake. Just don't choose anger, right? Good luck with that. Probably going to struggle quite a bit with that. So from that, it's a pretty easy move over to the next step of understanding. How does this come about? What are the triggers? And they may be distant in time and space. And there may be so much history in there. But that's a talk for John to give. That's his field. So I'll continue on with the down. Move on to verse 25. Every injury, whatever, the whole variety of evil deeds is brought about by circumstances. None is independent, none autonomous. Every injury, all evil deeds, is brought about by circumstances, also known as causes and conditions, interdependencies. And that's what the last line here is saying. None is independent, none autonomous, meaning it operates independently on its own, not dependent upon other things. That's what autonomy is. Sometimes referred to as freedom. We won't go down there either. That's a talk for another Saturday maybe. But the point here is that this isn't about things that are just to be taken on their own. And that's, if we look at where we're impatient, we're not looking at any justifying causes to it. And by justifying, I don't mean so much right or wrong as just explanatory, showing how did this happen. And it happens by circumstances. So again, we're back into the YN teachings. This section is really strongly tied to that. Everything is the result of causes and conditions. Everything. So to practice patience, we have to have that process, or it's going to be a real struggle. Moving on to 26. Conditions, once assembled, have no thought that they will give rise to some result. And that which is engendered does not think that it has been produced by such conditions. So this is an interesting way of framing it. So conditions have no thought. And what that kind of, also another way of looking at it is the world of dualities, which is deeply rooted in us. So we look at, and one of the core dualities is mind and matter. Our thoughts and our environment, the circumstances within. We see those as dualities. And what's being pointed out here can be seen as a teaching of non-duality, because these conditions have no thought. That's an abstraction. Which shouldn't be a surprise, because that's kind of the essence of thought, is an abstraction. So they have no thought that they will now give rise to some result. It's our mind that creates that. And in that creation, it's only looking at it from a very simplified point of view. And that means it's a point of view that we're very accustomed to. It's one we follow time and time again. It's a well-formed path. And whatever the result is, that which is engendered does not think that it has been produced by such conditions. So it's saying both the action, the move to respond, and then the result of that is not about thought. That's a huge statement. That it's causes and conditions. All the way down. So even what we perceive as thought, it's not that there's no thought. We know better than that. But those thoughts are nothing more than causes and conditions. We objectify it, reify it as something substantial. That's our sense of willpower. I can bring to it. Willpower is nothing but causes and conditions. So sometimes you might find that your willpower is pretty strong and you can deal with it. And then we want to say, well, that was my willpower. But there's no such thing. It's the causes and the conditions that all came together. And you can see how that's taking this more spacious view and dropping off sense of self. Because of course our willfulness is a real core aspect of our sense of self. But it's a creation. It's not about the thought. It's about all the causes and conditions that come together to create what we see as a thought and how we evaluate its result. Just see it all. So this is a YN approach, if anything is, to see it all as just the playing out causes and conditions, interdependencies, all the way down, all the way down. Then we can really begin to enable ourselves to respond in an appropriate way. And it may fulfill an idea we have about what would be a nice outcome for a given situation. It may not. That's beyond our control. But if we take that activity with that understanding of no self, so we're not trying to impose ourselves on the world, but just as part of this web of causes and conditions. And how do we want to interact within our environment, to create an environment for the benefit of all beings? That kind of becomes then the heart of practice, is to carry that forward. Understanding is key, but compassion, feeling with all beings. So it's the universality, all these causes and conditions. And with our limited view of necessity, we're finite beings. You know, we can't see. We'll leave that to talking about before, about the supercomputers, AI, process immense amounts of data very quickly. We'll leave it to them to try and go down that path. But for we mere humans, part of that richness is that we don't know. We don't have the result pop up and say, well, that's it. But within that not knowing, we carry out precepts. We take it very seriously. So really important to kind of get a handle on this, the role of thought, and tied in with that willfulness. Moving on to 27, we're going to be looking at the self, because this section reads, that which is referred to as the primal substance, that which has been labeled as the self with the capital S. Do not come into being thinking that is how I will arise. So the primal substance, it's a sort of substance that all reality is composed out of. And the primal substance, labeled as self, is kind of pointing to this view that things have their own substantial being. So it's not seeing the emptiness of all, the interdependence of all things. It's seeing things in the old traditional ways, all these separate entities, which then kind of feeds our conditioned responses, the impatient responses, because we can blame that object, that self. It's the whole source of the whole problem. That politician, that business, that tycoon, the whole thing. It's not that, doesn't operate that way. So that's what's being pointed out here. If you're going to practice patience, hopefully you can see how that is really pretty key. To be able to stop seeing things as separate entities and bearing that full responsibility. It's way more complicated. And at the root of that complication is interdependence. That's why in our judicial system, as we've progressed through the Western Enlightenment, having greater understanding of people and why they do things, and the criminal justice system, there's this ongoing kind of tension between punishment versus rehabilitation. And rehabilitation, of course, is dependent upon an understanding of interdependence. What are the causes and conditions? How can we inject that understanding into somebody's life? Someone who's done and committed an act that was very harmful. How can we best respond to that? And we've tended to take that approach of just punish them because it's their fault and it's all on them. But with this more enlightened view that's kind of slowly seeped into our society and our way of thinking, we recognize that, well, yeah, it's kind of odd that people with distressed material circumstances are more apt to do those kinds of actions. And even from a common sense standpoint, we might come to see, well, maybe society's norms don't seem appropriate to those folks because society isn't really treating them very well. So why are they going to sign on to that? So there's an increasing level of awareness here that to just blame the primal substance, that person, your soul, which is the way many people view that primal substance, is soul stuff. That itself is just the result of causes and conditions. Why do we see a soul? Why do we see a self? And there may be good reasons for it. But again, you're back into the causes and conditions. So we're always in the web, the bigger World Wide Web. It's beyond any particular address. It sees all the addresses as, and actually maybe the World Wide Web is a good example. All the addresses are interacting. Even if you don't want them to, and you go through all your junk mail. Next verse 28. That which is not manifest is not yet there. So what could want to come to be? And permanently drawn toward its object, it can never cease from being so. So this is an old line that's taken against the substantialist view of reality. That which is not manifest, not apparent to us right here and now, is not yet there. So what is it then that wants to come to be? Because it's not here. It's not here. So it has to be dependent upon something else. That's what they're pointing to. So this is classic Nagarjuna style logic, the way Nagarjuna works through the teachings on emptiness. Because the thing itself can't cause itself, but it's not here. So how does that all happen? So we begin to see how the Mahayana view of interdependence, which also leads to the view that I often reference of reality as being a verb. It's a flow, it's movement, it's not things. The atomistic view of reality. And of course, modern physics is starting to realize when you get down to that level, that's weird stuff going on. Because it's not things. It's all activity. So things that don't make any sense in our conventional way of seeing. That's kind of where our physicists are faced with right now. Very similar things. What is it that could want to come to be? How does this energy take this shape? And being permanently drawn towards its object, it can never cease being so. That kind of sounds like the teachings of suchness. No going, no coming, because there's no thing. What is it that comes and goes? It can never cease from being so. And the next verse just continues on here. This really deep analysis into self and the contradictory notions that it presents to us, where it says, indeed, this self, if permanent, is certainly impassable, like space itself. And should it meet with other factors, how should they affect it, since it is unchanging? This is the nature of self, is to be unchanging. It is what it is, as our saying goes. It's its nature. Or the scorpion and the frog. That's scorpion's nature. It's just to sting. And we view that as just part of its thingness. When actually it's part of this indeterminate vast life. And because those indeterminacies vary from apparent individuals, probably lots of scorpions that might pitch that ride and not sting the frog. But it's a great metaphor, so I'm not bashing it. I love it. But to kind of be able to open our minds and see that is the reality. Because that's kind of part of stereotyping, too. So if you think about it, ills that our society is confronted with, like racism. We turn people of a certain category into a thing. This is what you are because these are your characteristics. We classify people, and therefore we think we know them. How sad, how tragic. It's heartbreaking, really. When we understand the true nature of all beings, this rich interdependency that we're part of, that we still go on to this day treating people in such a fashion as these separate beings. So what do? We separate them because they're separate beings. So that's best for us. We need to separate. How crazy is that? And of course, patience then, there's no patience extended to people like that because they're different right out of the gate. So a lot of our impatience on a society-wide basis arises out of this issue about things being this way. And the affliction is beyond the individual level. It's global. So, as one might say, a whole new way of thinking is called for. And I think that's very, very true. And part of the power of this particular practice is that that's what we're doing. We're working towards changing the way the world thinks about these things. To me, I think that's arguably the highest calling you could have. It's just that. And then the next verse is still, and this is very Nagarjuna-like, where it says, if when things occur, it stays unchanged and as before, what influence has action had on it? They say that this affects the self, but what connection could there be between them? How can you affect a self like that? It can't be changed. Again, think racism. That's why segregation is the appropriate response because you can't change them. And that used to be the thing about education from the days of slavery, and even post-slavery. Why would you educate them? They are not capable of that. Wow, it's unbelievable. That's coming out of this kind of mindset. What influence has action had on it? What connection could there be between them, between education and the normal outcome you would expect from that? There are some individuals that's the way you want to go, and others that's not the case. So we start making our dualities and judgments that apply across the board. And we can't just be present with what's manifesting right here and now and respond to it in that universal way. It begins with beings are numberless, I vow to say that. Doesn't then go on to list categories of beings and how you will save them by category. It's not part of this practice. It's all universal. So then we roll on to verse 31, which, given what we've been covering, this is kind of a good point to pull things together. And this will give us a look at, well, where are we at now with this text? So Shanti Deva says here, all things then depend on something else. On this depends the fact that none are independent. Knowing this, we will not be annoyed at objects that resemble magical appearances. Magical is just anything that doesn't fit our understanding. And magical is a beautiful thing because our understanding is limited. And actually, when we experience the magical, it helps us understand the beauty of having a limited view, because it seems so magical, as if that's a bad thing. It becomes a bad thing when we objectify it. And now we start to enter into the magical realm, and we figure that all out. And of course, then it stops being magical. There are workshops all over the place that are all about that. No, that's not the way it is. There's definitely a lot of magic out there. So to answer the old loving spoonful question, yeah, I believe in magic. Definitely. But as magic, not as something to try and control. 5 steps to leading a magical life. But I do think this practice helps lead one to a magical life. Because you see the vastness without trying to understand the whole thing. Recognizing that our understanding is predicated upon our kind of stereotyping and classifying and all that. And I'm not bashing that approach. It's powerful. It creates a lot of beautiful things for us in our lives. But it can't get to the whole thing. So we have to leave room for the magic and also have the classified realities out there that we think we do understand. And we do until we push too far, like quantum physicists. And then all of a sudden, there's a lot of magic starting to appear for them. So they also would tell John Sebastian, we believe in magic. We see it in our labs. But one day, of course, the hardcore scientists, one day we will understand. Just needs a lot more work. And this path, and this is where Nagarjuna is teaching, which Shanti Deva is kind of channeling here. It's predicated upon this sense that we cannot get to the heart of this entirety of existence with that way of thinking. You can't get there from here. That's what's being presented here. So in that sense, it's kind of anti-scientific when science is taken as the sole discipline that will lead us to an understanding of all things. Which is why, as science runs into more and more things it doesn't understand, it's really created the opening, I think, for spirituality to start to enter into that dialogue. Because they can no longer really deny that. Because it's showing up in their own results. And it's an element of faith. They might bash faith, but The belief in science is faith. Yeah. So, hey, choose your faith. It's kind of like believing in that superior power being that will lead us to the truth. This is what it will look like. So I'm okay being in a world where the truth has elements of that understanding that we can work with to accomplish things. But when we really bring our whole soul, so to speak, into something, we can start to experience the magic. Because it's always there. That's the thing. We just don't see it. We just don't see it. I forgot to get my phone, so could I get a time check from you, and then I'll.
Sure. It is about 10 to 11, about 8 to 11.
Okay, we're good shape. John, you had something.
Just, it dawns on me what you're talking about, how much Shohaku's idea of living by vow and what the scientific method are similar in the sense of you make your best effort, you make your best understanding, with the understanding that you ain't there yet.
Right.
That there's always something more out there.
Right.
Science, I think, by its nature, believes that you can get to the ultimate,
Yeah.
which is the difference.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think that difference is rooted in science's dependence on objectivities.
True. Yeah.
That's I
true.
think, the heart of it. So what we're seeing here in this section of Shanti Deva's text is a direct assault, I'll even call it, on that way of viewing things as objectivities. That just doesn't work. It doesn't work.
Eventually, you bump up against something.
Yeah. And of course, if you're just living in the world of magic and you don't have any practical capabilities, you're not going to survive and reproduce either. So that's going to be a short-lived experiment in the geological record. So you need to bring them both together to really have that full, deep appreciation for this marvel of our lives, of existence. That's the deal. The merging of difference and unity. The difference is the scientist's endeavor.
Yeah, but I'm supposed to be able to find the ultimate.
Right. Yeah.
Excellent. Except you can.
Yeah. The ultimate is you're into the magical. Brannigan?
You spoke about this in some ways, but I wish you would amplify it a little bit more.
Mhm.
Speaking about causes and conditions in art.
In art.
Because,
Yeah.
I think of causes and conditions in terms of the darker side of it, of craving and greed. But then those causes and conditions are necessary to create art.
Yeah.
So, and you talk about in terms of magical, but
Right.
can you expand a little bit?
Yeah, and I think the way I would respond to that is that it kind of relates back to what I was saying about just seeing things as nothing but the magical, or seeing things as just the objectifiable. That the reality is bringing them both together. So the forms that you study in order to paint or to write or to do woodworking in a very artistic, creative way. Uh, they're kind of built upon certain materials, certain techniques, but not limited by them. So that's the magic, if you will, of the arts, is that it contains them both. So there is structure, but you're not bound to it. You know, the line I've quoted in here before about Charlie Parker giving advice to a young musician: should study and learn all of that and then forget it. You need to take that in. It needs to be the underpinnings of your art. But don't then just spend your life following those rules and regulations, we'll call them. You
That
take,
helps.
okay.
That's great. Charlie Parker, remember that.
Yeah, a true master. John?
Are you saying, this is just a thought that came to my mind, I got to think about some more, but are you saying that magic is the expression of the absolute?
Yeah, and that's all. We could also say it's the expression of the unknown.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now in the jazz world, I'm thinking especially of Wayne Shorter. He was all about the unknown. In fact, his response to his pianists about when they were going to be rehearsing these pieces, the compositions they had, Wayne's response was, well, how can you rehearse the unknown? You have to go out and open yourself to it and see what comes forth. And it will be unknown each time. Yeah, each time the painter sits down at her or his canvas, you know, the element of the unknown. What's that gonna turn into? Yeah, if you know, well, that's an objectifiable skill set called being a draftsman. You know. But if you're an artist, you're dealing in the unknown. And you find your comfort level there. That's really where you thrive. But part of the thriving is that it's informed by the structure. Because we do need structure. And whatever it is we're doing. Doesn't have it's not limited just to the arts. You know, throughout our lives. We need structure. And that was a big deal for me in retirement, is recognizing how do I recreate structure that I'm leaving behind, and now I can create it anew. And it felt so wonderful to be able to do that. Yeah, it wouldn't have been, for me certainly, a very helpful way to go about things if I just retired and said, oh, I'm free of structure. It's just total freedom. It's a mistaken notion of freedom, in fact. And I've heard Zen teachers talk about this in conjunction with going on an extended retreat, where you would look at that and say, well, there's no freedom at all in there. Every freaking minute of your day is already structured for you. Oh, you're either sitting or walking meditation or eating or work practice, or even the break you get a little bit of the day kind of takes on that form as well. It's just part of the structure. And yet, you know, going on a longer retreat, as people that have done that realize, really creates the opportunity to experience freedom, liberation in that kind of a setting. So I think that's a real good example of how the two go hand in hand, having the structure, but also being able to experience true liberation within the structure. I mean, outside of the structure, it's just chaos. Of course, it's chaos theory determined. This is where science has wisdom to provide us with. In chaotic systems, they're looking for order. They will gravitate over time towards some kind of orderliness, kind of like fluid dynamics. You can have that initial flow that's highly irregular, but where does it end up? Regularity. It's not just chaotic jumble for too terribly long. It coalesces. Just by nature, we do that. We coalesce. And we can do that from within the chaos. So the two aren't contradictory. They need each other. So the ultimate, the one, the unitary reality of all things can be seen from either aspect, but not limited by either one. So as long as we're in pause mode, discussion mode, and anything else coming up. All good? All right, well, we'll move on a bit further. I thought in view of our work period today, we'd end a little bit sooner than usual, but I'm also getting the sense that we're getting a pretty deep dive into this topic.
Seems like there's a lot here.
Yes, yeah, a whole lot that really gets to such core points in our practice and our view of reality. And then, so if we move on to the next verse, 32, just further elaboration on what we're talking about here. Resistance, you may say, is out of place. For what will be opposed by whom? The stream of suffering is cut through by patience. There's nothing inappropriate in wanting that. So that's a pretty powerful statement. The point in the first two lines about resistance being out of place because what will be opposed by whom comes back to this notion of no self. If you take that away, it's like, well, that's what resistance is predicated on. So, if you're a social justice activist, you need to have what are we resisting today? What's the resistance du jour? And what this is pointing to is that that's not about that. So so from a political standpoint, it's not positioning yourself against another person or group of people. That's what this is all about, which is what makes it so important. It's not saying that we don't respond, we're not activists, but it's this notion of being against. Better to see it as being caring beings that are out there in the world caring and addressing suffering. And that's the core of what we do, is being aware of suffering, following the example of the Bodhisattva of compassion, Avalokiteshvara, Kuan Yin. And so for that view, we're seeing that this isn't about resistance in that manner. The last two lines, the stream of suffering, is kind of subtly showing that this is not a thing. It's a stream. It's causes and conditions that create the suffering and keep it turning over on what we could call the wheel of suffering. It's a stream. And the stream of suffering is cut through by patience. By patience. So actually, this is, I think, going to be a good verse to stop with. Let's take a deeper dive into this. But boy, this is just a perfect way to conclude today's look at this. The fact that patience has this capacity of cutting through. I mean, in Buddhist iconography, imagery, the cutting through calls to mind wisdom, which is Manjushri. He's the bodhisattva you see with the sword in his hand. So this imagery that Shani Deva's creating elicits that immediately. It's like, wow. So we're going from wisdom, and now looking at patience as being this, we'll term it the bodhisattva of patience with the sword to cut through suffering. So what that's saying is our conditioned responses to things. That's the whole new way of seeing things that has to get created. And we can only get there through patience. Patience means, and I'll borrow the Donna Haraway term I keep coming back to, staying with the trouble is patience. Stay with it. Don't turn from it. And the reason why patience and wisdom can share this imagery of the sword is because of the wisdom that patience opens up for us, the capacity for wisdom. Because now we can see things more broadly. We can see things in their radical interdependencies. And we can see that all of our actions have impacts out there. And to be able to convey that understanding to others and thereby promote a more deeply caring world out there that cares for everything, not just one cause. There are important, vital causes out there, but not just caring for the environment, not just caring for racism, but these are just individual manifestations of our deeper caring for everything. It's not about size, down to the smallest thing, deeply caring. So that, and the assurance in the last line, there's nothing inappropriate in wanting that. Wanting that is the end of suffering. Beings are numberless, I vow to save them. Embedded within that, not stated, but vowing to save them is implying that these numberless beings are suffering. So saving them is the work of all Buddhist teachings, teachers, and all people practicing. That's saving all beings. Caring in this universal fashion. And certainly it's okay to have certain areas that you focus on as a skillful means man. If we just do it on a universal basis, then we can certainly have an impact. But if you have people that really develop expertise in one area, like the environment or racism, then you can have even more impact. So there's great value in that. But even the important thing is that the source is from this universal place, and that everybody recognize that. Because the more we recognize the universality, that just puts us so much further on that path of the fruits of patience. Because universality and patience are very close relatives. Patience is opening ourselves to the universe, to the myriad causes and conditions. So I think I'm going to close out my piece of this at that point, but we can certainly continue with any other comments, questions you might have.
Stuff that you mentioned earlier seems to be kind of the start for having patience.
Yeah.
And for me, when I'm trying to practice it, it can feel difficult to stop because it's like, there's like this motivation, suffering, pain, or whatever. They don't want to fix things. They want to, keep on pushing through it to figure it out. A lot of times is what it is, or make some changes with it. When I can sit in the patience, it seems like their sort of more spaciousness can come about.
Yes. And we grow accustomed to really dwelling in that spaciousness.
But then at what point do we act? Because a lot of times, like you mentioned.
Yeah. That's an excellent point, because we can just use that as a kind of our space out mode of dealing with things.
Missed out.
Yeah. But that runs counter to the practice of caring. So the response is kind of baked into caring. I mean, if you care for somebody who's injured, well, you're going to treat the injury. You're not going to say, I really care, but and I hope things go well for you. Have a good life. We have to take action. It's kind of just the essence of the matter. Of course, we have to act and find our own. And activity is limited. We act in this situation. So while our action is ultimately rippling out to all beings, but the immediate impact is going to be right here with this.
It seems like the chances could be greater of that action being, wise, effective, after pausing and having some patience and understanding, at least a little bit more of what the causes and conditions are.
Yeah.
Instead of just kind of shooting from the hip and
That's
doing what might feel good, but ultimately might not be effective.
Yeah. And I think all of us have had enough experience with both sides of that equation to understand the truth of what you're saying. It kind of proves itself out time and time again, I think. Doug.
Hey, Dean. I haven't used this venue before. I don't think the one you're using currently. That's not Zoom, whatever it is. So I don't know how to get your attention if I got a question, but I guess
that always works. That's
okay. All right. Here's my question. Reading through parts of the Way of the Bodhisattva, and specifically 23, verse 23, which I guess was the focus of today's discussion, if I understood your email. Has anyone ever taken? I'm sorry.
It was our starting point. That's all.
That's okay. All right. That's fine. Anyway, I mean, this was a more of a general question anyway, but in any event, reading through these things, they've always struck me as being abstract. are an abstraction of something. Has anyone ever written a book where they have taken, let's say, the whole of the Way of the Bodhisattva and applied it to themselves in sort of a very contemporaneous, personal way, where they illustrate these things and their life personally and not in such an abstract way? All they are to look for, these ill effects are all the same. The likewise, they are unwanted and sought. Defilements, nonetheless, insistently rise. So did they ever say, like, this is this was my defilements? These are the things. I mean, is there anyone to take in this thing and try to make it a little more relatable than a lot of abstractions? Or would that defeat the purpose? I mean, that was my question reading it last night.
Yeah, and essentially, I mean, there are commentaries on this text, and that's a function that commentaries often take on. Maybe not exclusively using that approach, but it certainly becomes part of their analysis, is to give concrete examples. Of course, I always try to do that same thing here as well. So it needs to be part of any kind of account for a text like this.
How long has this been around? When was it written? I'm sorry, I didn't look at the beginning of it.
Yeah, in my recollection is, correct me if I'm off on this, but I always thought that this was around 500 or so in the Common Era. So about
Written?
1,500 years ago.
Wow. So in 1,500 years, to your knowledge, nobody has sat down and sort of applied this to their daily life.
Oh, no, I think that's the title of the book kind of indicates the way of the Bodhisattva, which means, the way we practice, and that's how we live our life. So it really comes down to how do we take these teachings and apply them. And what I did today, which will hopefully serve as a launching to that, is just look at patience as to how that plays out in our life and how we can use that to alleviate suffering, both for us and for others. And as James was just indicating, the practice of patience begins with stopping, because we have that impulse to respond in what's usually a conditioned way, the same way every time. We have to stop, hit the pause button, and look at the situation from the standpoint of Buddhist teachings like the interdependence of all things. So Dharma does also play a major role here, but it has applicability to our daily practice.
So I'm not saying it doesn't. I'm not really contesting that. I'm really saying, is anyone sat down in those ensuing 1,500 years of this book being around and saying, this is the nitty gritty of how this affects me. This is my defilement. In other words, make it more relatable. I mean, this text, frankly, it's like reading any spiritual text. Could be the Bible. It has a lot of abstractions about behavior, about common human issues, suffering, how to go beyond suffering, how to understand suffering. Mm-hmm. But that's all abstractions. I'm talking about somebody writing a book saying, I Joe Blow somewhere. Here is my looking at this particular. How did patience work for me when I'm reading verse 19? And what is verse 19? How does that play out in a very real, tangible way, in an exemplifying way? This is how it played in my life specifically. Do you think that might make this text somewhat more relatable if there was a human saying, "Hey, all right, I went through this. I'm not necessarily a Buddhist teacher. I am not anybody with profound knowledge, but I'm somebody sincerely attempting to understand these. And this is how I see them in my life. This is what defilement means." Because these things are really abstract, and it really helps. It's like any kind of example. The more of a face it has, oftentimes the more relatable it is. If I can put myself in that other person's place, I don't find myself easily putting myself in the place of these words. I don't find it, don't read a person in this. I read a
Well, that's good. Yeah, we're trying to get over this concept of person.
well, yeah. On the other hand, I think it's easy to relate. I'm sure you, when you go to any place to present something, probably relate certain aspects of your personal life. How is this? I'm guessing maybe you don't.
No, very much do.
All right.
Sure.
So hasn't anyone ever written a book and put that down in that same way? So like saying, all right, this is only one person. This is a person maybe who is, unlike myself, practiced or attempted to practice Buddhism for decades. And they just review what this meant, maybe over a period of time. Because when the first time they applied verse 23 in patience, it was one thing. 10 years later, it was something else. But that idea of it being related to an individual and their life, my wife, my kids, my job, going to the bathroom, getting sick, getting better, all of those things that we have to deal with, we all deal with, that are not abstractions. So it's something that is very, very specific to a person, but the person really endeavoring to make these, things and talking about, what they were and specifically in their life. It just, do you know of anything out there like that?
I do, although I don't have a copy of it.
Okay.
But Chris, who normally is teaching this class, has been using it as a principle. Is that the Pema Chodron? Yeah. Pema Chodron is maybe our best Buddhist teacher for taking that approach. She has a commentary on the Way of the Bodhisattva. So that's...
Is that a book that she's published?
It is.
Also, Reb Anderson has a book that I think would apply, because in all of his books he gives personal examples.
For sure, yeah.
So I have it at home. I can't remember the name of it, but it's about.
Could somebody get the names of those books, if you wouldn't mind, and email
I can give you copies right now, because Glenn brought his copy of it in. It's Becoming Bodhisattvas.
Okay. And by whom?
By Pema, P-E-M-A.
Okay.
Chodron, C-H-O-D-R-O-N.
Okay.
There is a previous version of that book. It's basically the same book. It's titled No Way Out.
Oh, okay.
I already had it.
Okay.
Bought this one. So 2 copies now.
All right.
Another one is Norman Fisher's When I See You, I Bow.
Okay.
That has lots of personal stories in it.
Yeah. So they're out there. Oh yeah.
Okay, that's 2.
Well, that'll get you started.
Yeah, I know of Pema Chodron. I may even have the second book. Refresh my memory. What was it? I don't have a pen or pencil with me, unfortunately, at this moment. So what were the titles again, please? Or her title of her book that really kind of illustrates this in her personal life?
Pema Chodron, when I gave you?
Yeah.
Okay. It's Becoming Bodhisattvas.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll get it. And someone related another title too that I seem to have remembered buying of hers. What was that? Anybody?
I see you.
I think
the Norman Fisher, When I Meet You, I Bow.
Yeah. When I meet you, I bow.
Okay. Becoming the Bodhisattva. When I meet you, I bow. I'll find them. Thank you.
There's another one by Norman Fisher too. The way the world could be.
I don't have.
It's one of his newer ones.
It's
It's talking about being Bodhisattva in this world. So Norman Fisher,
There's another one, a little less about personal experience, but written by the Dalai Lama for the benefit of all beings. Is commentary on Shantideva's Way of the Bodhisattva.
Okay, that one I do have. Yeah. For the benefit. Yeah. Okay.
I call it.
The World Could Be Otherwise. Is that other Norman Fisher book? Really excellent.
Yeah.
What did you say?
The world could be otherwise.
That's Norman
Norman
Fisher.
Fisher, yeah, is one of his newer ones.
Good stuff. John?
As you were talking about all of this, it seems to me there's a common denominator. You were talking about art, which made me think about how most of the time, and most of the artists that I know, or if I start with a wood piece, it's a conversation.
Yeah.
I start with an idea, but as I'm working, that becomes a conversation between me and the piece I'm working on. And it changes as time goes on, because I'm listening and looking. That's really what we're talking about with the Dharma.
And the responding.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I was thinking about Chiazan's, when he was asked to distill his practice, he said, just listen.
Mhm.
And that's what we do in a conversation, as we listen to the other person. And we're talking about doing that with the Dharma, or we're talking about doing that artistically, or whatever. It's really having a conversation, a constant conversation with the whole universe.
Hence the importance of openness, because we
Yeah.
can't even receive that unless
Yeah.
we're open.
Yeah, unless you're open, you don't receive.
Yeah.
And if you don't receive, you don't have a conversation.
Yeah. So the practice never gets out of the gate. Okay, well, let's go ahead and chant out and get to work. May
Our
our
intention equally penetrate every being and place with the true merit of Buddha's way. Beings are numberless. I vow to save them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable. I vow to become it.
Okay.